I never thought I would be the type of person to install security cameras around my property. For years, I resisted the idea, believing that my quiet suburban neighborhood was safe enough and that constant surveillance felt like an invasion of my own privacy. But after a series of strange occurrences over the past few months, my wife finally convinced me that we needed some form of protection, or at least a way to monitor what was happening when we were asleep. The installation process was straightforward enough, and within a single afternoon, I had 4 cameras positioned at strategic points around our home, covering the front door, the driveway, and both sides of the backyard. The system connected directly to my phone, sending me notifications whenever motion was detected, and I could review the footage at any time through a simple app interface. The first few weeks were uneventful, almost boring in their predictability. The cameras captured nothing more interesting than neighborhood cats prowling through our garden, the occasional raccoon rummaging through the trash bins, and our own comings and goings as we went about our daily routines. I started to feel a bit foolish about the whole thing, wondering if we had wasted our money on equipment we did not really need. My wife seemed satisfied though, and I suppose there was some peace of mind in knowing that if anything did happen, we would have evidence. I checked the footage less and less frequently as time went on, only glancing at the notifications when something particularly unusual triggered the motion sensors, like a delivery person arriving earlier than expected, or a strong gust of wind setting off false alarms. Everything changed on a Tuesday night in late October. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone before going to sleep, when I received a notification from the backyard camera. The timestamp showed it was just past 2 in the morning, and I almost ignored it, assuming it was probably just another animal passing through. But something made me open the app, perhaps some instinctive sense that this time was different. The footage loaded slowly, the progress bar crawling across my screen as my internet connection struggled with the file size. When the video finally began to play, I felt my stomach drop and a cold sensation spread through my chest. There was a figure standing near our back fence, partially illuminated by the dim glow of our porch light. At first glance, it appeared to be a man, tall and lanky, wearing what looked like dark clothing that blended into the shadows of the night. I sat up in bed, my heart beginning to pound as I watched the figure more closely. The person, if that is what it was, stood completely still for several long seconds, facing away from the camera toward the fence line. There was something deeply unsettling about the absolute stillness of the figure. The way it did not move even slightly, not swaying or shifting weight the way a living person naturally would. I increased the volume on my phone, hoping to catch some sound that might explain what I was seeing. But there was nothing except the ambient noise of crickets and the distant hum of traffic from the highway several blocks away. The figure remained motionless for what felt like an eternity, though the timestamp indicated it was only about 20 seconds. Then, slowly, impossibly, he began to turn around. The movement was wrong from the very beginning. Instead of pivoting on its feet the way a normal person would turn, the figure seemed to rotate its entire body as a single rigid unit, like a mannequin being spun on a turntable. My hands started to shake as I watched, my mind trying to rationalize what I was seeing, searching for some logical explanation that would make this make sense. Perhaps it was just the camera angle, or maybe the person was injured or impaired in some way. But as the figure continued its rotation, slowly revealing more of its front side to the camera, I realized that no rational explanation would suffice for what I was witnessing. The face, when it finally came into view, was pale and gaunt, with dark hollows where the eyes should have been. Though the resolution of the footage made it difficult to discern specific features, what happened next will be burned into my memory for the rest of my life. The figure completed its rotation until it was facing directly toward the camera, toward our house, and for a moment it simply stood there, its head tilted slightly to one side at an unnatural angle. Then, without any warning or preamble, its jaw began to open. But this was not the normal opening of a human mouth. The jaw dropped down and down and down, far beyond what should be anatomically possible for any person. It kept opening wider and wider, until the bottom of the jaw seemed to be level with the thing's chest, creating a gaping black void in the center of its face that seemed to swallow all the available light. I could see no teeth, no tongue, nothing inside that terrible aperture except darkness. I must have made some sound of distress, because my wife stirred beside me, asking gruggily what was wrong. I could not answer her, could not tear my eyes away from the screen of my phone. where this impossible thing continued to stand in our backyard with its jaw open to an inhuman degree. The footage lasted another 10 seconds after the jaw opened, during which the figure remained perfectly still, that massive mouth gaping like some kind of nightmarish bear trap. Then, abruptly, it closed its jaw with a speed that seemed wrong, too fast to be natural, and the figure turned away from the camera and moved toward the back fence. Within seconds, it had vanished from the frame, disappearing into the darkness beyond our property line. My wife was fully awake now, sitting up and demanding to know what was happening. With trembling hands, I handed her my phone and made her watch the footage from the beginning. I watched her face as she viewed the video, seeing her expression change from confusion to concern to outright fear. When the jaw opened on screen, she actually gasped and dropped the phone onto the bed between us. For several long minutes, we just sat there in the darkness of our bedroom, neither of us speaking, both of us trying to process what we had just witnessed. Finally, my wife asked a question that was on both our minds. What the hell was that thing? We spent the rest of that night awake, with every light in the house turned on, checking and rechecking that all the doors and windows were locked. I kept refreshing the camera feeds on my phone, half expecting to see that figure appear again in one of the frames, but the backyard remained empty and still. As dawn began to break and the first light of morning crept across the sky, we discussed what we should do. Should we call the police and show them the footage? Would they even believe us? Or would they think we were crazy, or that the video had been doctored somehow? Should we tell our neighbors? Warn them that something dangerous might be lurking in the area? In the end, we decided to wait and see if anything else happened, to gather more evidence before we made any drastic decisions. The next few days passed in a haze of anxiety and sleeplessness. I found myself obsessively checking the camera footage, reviewing every notification no matter how trivial, watching hours of mundane recordings in search of any sign of that figure returning. My wife and I barely left the house except when absolutely necessary, and when we did go out, we made sure to return well before dark. I noticed that I was constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows, seeing threatening shapes in every corner of our property. My coworkers commented that I looked tired and distracted, but I could not bring myself to tell them the real reason for my exhaustion. How could I explain that I was terrified of my own backyard, of what might be waiting there in the darkness? On the fourth night, after the initial incident, it happened again. This time, the notification came just after midnight, and I was already awake, too anxious to sleep. I grabbed my phone immediately when I felt the vibration, my heart already racing before I even looked at the screen. The footage showed the figure in almost exactly the same position as before, standing near the back fence with its back to the camera. Once again, it stood in that unnatural stillness for several seconds before beginning its slow, mechanical rotation. I wanted to look away, wanted to throw my phone across the room and pretend I had never seen anything, but I forced myself to keep watching. The figure completed its turn, and once again, its jaw began to drop open, wider and wider, creating that impossible void in the center of its face. But this time, something was different. This time, as I stared at the screen with a mixture of terror and morbid fascination, I thought I could see something moving inside that black opening. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the light or a compression artifact in the video, but as I watched more closely, I became certain that there was movement within the darkness of its mouth. Something was writhing in there, multiple somethings, twisting and coiling like a nest of serpents. The resolution was not high enough to make out specific details, but the suggestion of movement was unmistakable. I woke my wife immediately this time, and we watched the rest of the footage together. After the jaw had been open for about 15 seconds, the figure closed it once more with that same disturbing speed and turned away, moving back toward the fence and disappearing from view. This time, we both noticed something we had missed in the first video. As the figure moved away from the camera, we could see that it was not walking normally. Its legs moved, yes, but there was no natural rhythm to the gait, no shifting of weight or bending of joints. It glided more than walked, as if it were being pulled along by some invisible force rather than propelling itself through normal locomotion. That second sighting was the catalyst that pushed us to action. The next morning, my wife stayed home from work, claiming she was sick, and I took a personal day as well. We spent hours discussing our options, debating what to do next. We reviewed the footage frame by frame, trying to spot details we might have missed. looking for anything that might give us a clue about what this thing was or what it wanted. I took screenshots from the clearest moments of the video and tried running them through reverse image searches online, but found nothing helpful. We considered every possibility, no matter how absurd it seemed. Could it be a person in a costume? Some kind of elaborate prank? But who would do such a thing? And how could they make their jaw open like that? Could it be some kind of animal we were unfamiliar with? Something that only looked humanoid from a distance? But no animal on Earth moves the way this thing moved. We decided to reach out to a friend of mine who worked in law enforcement, someone I trusted to take us seriously and not dismiss our concerns out of hand. I sent him the footage with a brief explanation of what we had captured, trying to keep my message as factual and unemotional as possible. He responded within an hour, saying that he had watched the videos and agreed that there was definitely something unusual going on. He offered to come by our house that evening to discuss the situation in person and to take a look around our property. His willingness to treat this seriously was an enormous relief, and for the first time in days, I felt like perhaps we were not completely alone in dealing with this nightmare. That evening, my friend arrived just as the sun was setting. We showed him around the backyard, pointing out exactly where the figure had been standing in the footage, and he examined the area carefully with a flashlight, looking for any signs of disturbance. He found nothing unusual. No footprints or broken vegetation. Nothing to indicate that anyone or anything had been there at all. The three of us sat in our kitchen, and he reviewed the footage again on his laptop, watching it multiple times with a grim expression on his face. Finally, he sat back and admitted that he did not know what to make of it. The videos were certainly disturbing, and whatever was in them did not look like any person he had ever seen. But without more concrete evidence or additional sightings, there was not much official action that could be taken. He did offer some practical advice. However, he suggested we add more cameras with higher resolution capabilities, particularly ones with better night vision and motion tracking. He recommended that we install additional outdoor lighting to eliminate some of the dark spots in our yard where something could lurk unseen. Most importantly, he told us to keep documenting everything, to save every piece of footage no matter how insignificant it seemed, and to call him immediately if we saw the figure again, or if it tried to approach the house. He promised that if this thing appeared again and made any move toward us or our property, he would personally come out and investigate. Official channels be damned. The upgrades to our security system were installed within the week. We now had 8 cameras covering every possible angle of our property. All of them high-definition models with infrared night vision capabilities that could capture clear footage even in complete darkness. We added motion-activated floodlights along the back fence and on both sides of the house, bright enough to illuminate our entire yard if triggered. The whole setup cost us a small fortune. Money we really could not afford to spend, but my wife and I both agreed that no price was too high for our safety and peace of mind. If this thing came back, we would have crystal clear documentation of exactly what it was and what it was doing on our property. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. The new cameras captured the usual array of nocturnal wildlife, now in much greater detail than before, but there was no sign of the figure. We began to relax slightly, cautiously optimistic that perhaps it had moved on, that whatever had drawn it to our property had lost its appeal. We started sleeping through the night again, no longer jolting awake at every notification from the camera system. My wife returned to her normal work schedule, and I found myself able to focus on my job instead of obsessively checking camera feeds throughout the day. We even had friends over for dinner one weekend, something we had not felt comfortable doing since the sightings began. Then, on a moonless Friday night in early November, it returned. The notification came through at 1:30 in the morning, and this time it was not from the backyard camera. The figure appeared on the side of our house, in the narrow space between our property and our neighbor's fence. The new camera caught it clearly, the infrared illumination rendering it in stark shades of black and white. It stood facing the wall of our house, its impossibly elongated limbs clearly visible in the improved footage. From this angle, and with better resolution, I could see details that had been obscured in the earlier videos. Its fingers, if they could be called fingers, were too long and appeared to have too many joints, bending at angles that made my eyes hurt to look at. Its clothing, which I had thought was simply dark fabric, seemed to be part of its body, with no clear distinction between where cloth ended and skin began. As Primera watch had frozen in my bed, with my phone clutched in shaking hands, the figure began to move along the wall of our house, heading toward the back. Its movements were slow and deliberate, and I realized with growing horror that it was making its way toward our bedroom window, the window where my wife and I were currently sleeping, separated from this thing by nothing more than a pane of glass and a thin curtain. I grabbed my wife's shoulder and shook her awake, then showed her the live feed on my phone. Her eyes widened as she saw where the figure was and where it was heading. We both looked toward our bedroom window, as if we might be able to see through the curtains to the thing that was approaching outside. The motion-activated floodlight on that side of the house suddenly blazed to life, triggered by the figure's movement. I switched the camera feed to color mode, and what I saw in the bright artificial light was somehow worse than what I had seen in infrared. The thing's skin, now fully visible, was not quite the right color for human flesh. It was too pale, almost gray, with a waxy quality that reminded me of a corpse. But it was the face that truly sent waves of terror through my body. Even from the camera's angle, I could see that its features were wrong, subtly distorted in ways that my brain struggled to process. The eyes were too large and set too far apart. The nose barely existed as a slight protrusion, and the mouth, even when closed, seemed to extend too far across the face. The figure stopped directly outside our bedroom window. It stood there for several seconds, and then, with agonizing slowness, it turned its head to look directly at the camera. For a moment, I had the irrational feeling that it was looking through the camera, through my phone screen, directly at me. Then its jaw began to open. Just as before, it dropped down far beyond human capability. But this time, with the high-definition camera and bright lighting, I could clearly see what was inside that gaping maw. There were teeth, but not arranged in any pattern that made anatomical sense. They seemed to line the entire interior of the mouth in irregular rows, pointing in all directions. And behind the teeth, I could see the writhing movement I had noticed in the previous video, now revealed to be dozens of thin, pale appendages, like fingers or tentacles, all of them reaching and grasping at the air. My wife made a sound that was half scream, half sob, and I quickly muted my phone, terrified that the thing outside might somehow hear us and know we were watching it. We sat paralyzed in our bed as the figure kept its mouth open for nearly 30 seconds, those appendages writhing obscenely in the floodlight's glare. Then, without warning, it closed its mouth and turned away from the window. But instead of leaving the way it had come, it moved to our back door. I switched camera feeds and watched in horror as it approached the door and stood there, apparently examining it. For one terrifying moment, I thought it was going to try to force its way inside, and I reached for my phone to call 911. But after a few seconds of inspection, the figure turned away and walked toward the back fence, disappearing once again into the darkness beyond our property. This time, we did not wait until morning. I immediately called my friend in law enforcement, waking him in the middle of the night, and told him what had just happened. He was at our house within 20 minutes, arriving with another officer in tow. They searched our entire property with flashlights and weapons drawn, checking every corner of the yard, examining the area around our bedroom window and the back door where the figure had been standing. Once again, they found nothing, no trace of anything having been there. But when I showed them the new footage, both officers went pale. The second officer, who I had not met before, actually took a step back from the laptop screen when the thing's mouth opened, revealing the teeth and those writhing appendages. They took copies of all the footage we had captured, including the earlier videos from the initial sightings. My friend promised that he would forward everything to his superiors and see if anyone could make sense of what we were dealing with. He also strongly suggested that my wife and I consider staying somewhere else for a while, at least until they could figure out what was going on. He said it was clear that this thing, whatever it was, had some kind of fixation on our property and that our safety could not be guaranteed. We thanked him for coming out, and after he and his partner left, we sat in our living room with all the lights on, trying to decide what to do next. The next day, we packed bags and went to stay with my wife's parents, who lived about 40 minutes away. We felt ashamed and defeated, like we were abandoning our home. But the alternative, staying there and waiting for that thing to return, possibly to try to get inside, was simply too terrifying to contemplate. We left the security system running and I checked it constantly from my phone, watching the empty feeds of our property and feeling a strange mixture of relief and loss. We had worked so hard to buy that house, had spent years making it into a home, and now we were too afraid to live there. 3 days passed without incident. The cameras captured nothing unusual, just the normal rhythms of a suburban backyard. We started to discuss the possibility of returning home, of trying to reclaim our lives. My friend from law enforcement called to say that he had shown the footage to several people in the department, including some investigators who specialized in unusual cases. But nobody could offer any explanation for what we had captured. One investigator had suggested it might be an elaborate hoax, someone in a sophisticated costume. But my friend said that after examining the footage frame by frame, he did not believe that was possible. The movements were too fluid, too inhuman, and there was no evidence of any costume elements or practical effects. On the fourth night of our stay at my in-laws' house, I received another notification from our home security system. It was just after 3 a.m, and I had been sleeping fitfully on the pull-out couch in the living room. The notification woke me instantly, and I grabbed my phone with a sense of dread. The footage showed the figure in our backyard once again, but this time it was not alone. There were 3 of them, all standing in a loose formation near our back fence. They stood facing the house, perfectly still, 3 tall and impossibly gaunt figures that looked like nightmarish reflections of human beings. As I watched, they all began to turn in unison, their bodies rotating in that same mechanical way, until they faced the camera directly. What happened next confirmed my worst fears about these things. All 3 of them, simultaneously, opened their jaws to that impossible degree, revealing 3 gaping black voids lined with those irregular teeth and filled with writhing appendages. They held this position for several seconds, and then, in perfect sync, they closed their mouths and began to walk toward the house. Not gliding this time, but walking with deliberate steps, moving directly toward the back door. I was already on my feet, already calling my friend, watching the footage in real time as these 3 entities approached our home. They reached the back door and stopped, and for a moment I thought they were going to break in, that I would have to watch helplessly from miles away as they invaded our house. But they did not force entry. Instead, they simply stood there at the door for nearly 5 minutes, arranged in a semicircle, before finally turning away and leaving the property. By the time my friend and several other officers arrived at our house, the figures were long gone, but I had captured every second of their visit in high-definition video. The officers were shaken by what they saw in the footage, particularly the sight of multiple entities moving in such perfect coordination. One of the younger officers suggested that maybe we were dealing with something beyond normal police jurisdiction, that perhaps we needed to contact people who specialized in paranormal phenomena or unexplained events. That suggestion opened up a new avenue of investigation through contacts in the department. My friend was able to put me in touch with a researcher at a nearby university who studied anomalous phenomena and cryptozoology. I sent him all the footage we had captured, along with a detailed timeline of events. He responded within hours, saying that what we had documented was among the clearest evidence he had ever seen of non-human entities exhibiting predatory or surveillance behavior toward humans. He wanted to visit our property, to set up his own equipment, and conduct a thorough investigation. He also warned us not to return home until he had a chance to assess the situation, saying that these entities had demonstrated an escalating pattern of behavior and that their intentions were unknown and potentially dangerous. Over the next 2 weeks, the researcher, whose name was Dr. Marcus Chun, set up an extensive observation post at our property. With our permission, he installed additional cameras with specialized sensors, electromagnetic field detectors, and various other pieces of equipment that I did not fully understand. He spent several nights at the house himself, monitoring everything from a makeshift command center in our living room. During this time, the entities appeared twice more, both times in the early morning hours. Dr. Chun was able to capture even more detailed footage and collect various readings from his equipment that he said showed unusual energy patterns whenever the entities were present. After his investigation concluded, Dr. Chun sat down with my wife and me to discuss his findings. He explained that he believed we were dealing with what he called mimics, entities that approximate human form but are decidedly not human. He said that such beings had been reported throughout history and across cultures, always described in similar terms as tall, gaunt figures that could open their mouths to impossible degrees. The purpose of these entities remained unclear, he said, but their behavior suggested they were studying humans, possibly preparing for some kind of interaction. He could not say whether they were dangerous in the traditional sense, as there were no documented cases of them actually harming anyone, but their intent remained unknown, and that made them potentially very dangerous indeed. Dr. Chun's advice was stark and difficult to hear. He recommended that we not return to live at the property, at least not in the immediate future. He said that for reasons he did not understand, these entities had fixated on our home, and that fixation showed no signs of diminishing. He offered to continue monitoring the situation, to maintain his equipment at the house, and document any further appearances. He also said he would be publishing a paper about our case, with our identities protected, in the hope that bringing attention to these phenomena might lead to better understanding and perhaps eventually to solutions. So we are 3 months after that first sighting, living temporarily with family and visiting our own home, only during daylight hours to collect mail and check on things. The entities continue to appear irregularly, sometimes weeks apart, sometimes multiple times in a single week. They stand in our yard, they approach our windows and doors, they open their mouths in that horrifying display, and then they leave. Dr. Chun continues to document everything, building what he says is an unprecedented database of information about these beings. My friend in law enforcement checks on the property regularly and has filed official reports, though he admits the department has no idea how to handle the situation. I still have every piece of footage saved on my phone and backed up in multiple locations. Sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep, I watch the videos again, studying the figures, trying to understand what they are and what they want. My wife has started having nightmares, vivid dreams where those things are inside our house, standing at the foot of our bed with their jaws hanging open, those appendages reaching out toward her. We are both in therapy now, trying to process the trauma of having our sense of safety and normalcy completely shattered. We talk about selling the house, about starting over somewhere far away, but we worry that these things might follow us, that whatever has drawn them to us might not be tied to the location at all. The worst part is the uncertainty, the not knowing. Are these things dangerous? What do they want? Why our house, our property, us? Will they eventually lose interest and move on? Or will this continue indefinitely? Dr. Chun has no answers to these questions, only theories and speculation. He says we are pioneers in a sense, documenting something that has likely been happening throughout human history but rarely captured with such clarity. That is little comfort when you are afraid to live in your own home, when every notification from your security system sends your heart racing with fear. I'm sharing this story now because I want people to know what is out there, what might be watching from the darkness beyond the reach of streetlights and porch lights. I want people to understand that there are things in this world that do not fit into our neat categories of animal, human, or natural phenomenon, and I want to warn anyone who might encounter something similar. Do not dismiss it. Do not tell yourself you are seeing things or that it must have a rational explanation. Document everything. Reach out for help. And whatever you do, do not assume that these things are harmless, just because they have not directly harmed you yet. Every night, I check the camera feeds from our house, watching the empty backyard and the quiet street out front, waiting for that notification that will tell me they have returned. And every night, I wonder if this is the night they will do more than just stand and stare. I wonder if this is the night we will finally discover what they truly want. And I fear that when we do find out, it may already be too late.